rights over anybody in the room. Well, there's a simple way to do that, and there's a real cowboy way to do that, and that's by adopting a Mustang. Now today I want to talk about adopting a Mustang and why you should over buying a domestic horse. First off, I'd like to point out that intelligent animals are being killed because there's no place to hold them. And by doing this, you're saving an animal. And while saving an animal, you can also experience personal growth and you can learn to trade it. People break horses and train horses for a living. And if you decide you're going to adopt a Mustang, you can learn this trade. You can learn more about yourself, grow in patience, grow in kindness. You get tougher, really. And that's a big thing about it. Another thing I want to talk about is the cost effectiveness of adopting a Mustang. The Mustang adoption fee, according to the Great Escape Mustang Sanctuary, can be $125, and this is the standard for most Bureau of Land Management Mustang adoption events, and sometimes sanctuaries will even give them away for free. So cost effectiveness off initial cost compared to a domestic horse is much cheaper. Domestic horses can run you up to $100 if it's a cheap horse, and horses like that can come with health issues. They don't have particular good personalities, I guess you would say, and that does mix between Mustangs, and that's kind of the argument that people have. But comparing cost-wise, Mustangs are definitely more cost-effective, and they're pretty much the same thing, because a cheap horse, you're not going to have registered papers. Most likely, if someone's selling it for cheap, it's not broke, it's probably has a bad personality, whereas a Mustang, it can change between personalities, and you get to pick which one you adopt. So your options are not very limited. Another thing I'd like to talk about is wild Mustangs and training. A lot of people want to argue about, oh, well, wild Mustangs are crazy. They come from the wild, and they're not meant to be domesticated. Well, they had to start somewhere, and wild Mustangs in the wild are proven to be better trainable horses. They take incentives better due to the environment they come from. The wildness of them gives them lots of benefits. For example, like I was talking about earlier, incentive-wise, a horse, like a domestic horse, has been around feed, has been fed around people its whole life. It's not going to take so well in training because it doesn't care as much about food because it knows it's going to get fed. Whereas a Mustang in its previous environment had to scrounge for food and scavenge, and making it more willing to accept the incentive and form its mind around training and earning that incentive. And a lot of people don't really think about that when adopting a Mustang, and they just think it's going to be this crazy undertaking, and sometimes it is, but they are trainable just like any other horse. And another aspect of the environment they come from, them being wild horses, is their genetics. Like I talked about earlier, they're not going to be registered, they're not going to have any of the domesticated pedigrees, but their wild genetics makes them more adaptable. According to the Habitat for Horses, their genetics, that's the wrong citation, horsesandmen.com, which is a blog that talks about a lot of horse studies and how your relationship with your horse grows. It talks about Mustangs in this particular article that I'm citing from, and it talks about their genetics in terms of their bone structure and how their hooves are different from a domesticated horse because it's more suitable to a wild environment. So if you were to take a wild Mustang, and most people who have horses have cows as well, so you could train a Mustang to be a ranch horse or a rodeo horse, and you know that's a sturdy, hardy horse in its bones and in its feet. And that's something you can rely on, whereas domestic horses, it can vary. And sometimes you have to pay out of pocket for those good pedigrees, for good genetics. And you can save money, like I was saying earlier, cost effectiveness, by adopting a Mustang. And speaking on genetics and cost effectiveness, Mustangs are also healthier. Healthy, like they have hardy immune systems. In the wild, they're able to develop these immune systems, and whereas domestic horses who are in barns and stalls and highly groomed and taken care of, they don't get to develop these immune systems that make them extremely strong. Vet bills get lower. Just all kinds of health issues you have to worry about with a domesticated horse, which is a common problem for people who raise horses and train horses. The vet bills just soar. So Mustangs is a preferable alternative. And a lot of people just like to think about how wild they are, but they don't realize the benefit from adopting a wild horse. And the incentives earlier that I talked about, that information was from Habitats for Horses. And a part I thought was important that they mentioned was that when they take the incentives, they're able to adapt better. So from going from previous scrounging food, they want to learn and eat more, like I was saying earlier. And it makes them easier to train and halter break than it would a domestic horse, like I was saying earlier, who eats more food. So Habitats for Horses points out, makes a big point on the change in diet and how it can enrich a horse's mind to make it more adaptable. And those are the reasons, cost effectiveness, better genetics, because a lot of times in domesticated horse, genetics are focused towards pretty colors, sometimes athleticism, but it's hard to beat a Mustang in athleticism because it's, survival of the fittest. And you're saving an animal's life. Horses are as intelligent as dogs, if not more. They trust people. You can have a bond with a horse. And when you have a